So just if you don't know, we are live streaming this on YouTube and Facebook Live. So if you don't want to be, on the internet, just duck every once in a while. I don't know. You'll be fine. The camera will be on our presenter most of the time. So. I will repeat for Ken, for anybody who's just come in recently. Ken Egan has the 1889 book, as well as, I believe, the 1864 book, in more limited quantities, maybe, over there on the table, and that's available for purchase. You can purchase them from him after the talk, and he will be glad to sign those for you. And half of the proceeds go to Humanities Montana to fund projects around the state. So. Please partake of that if you haven't got the book already. I don't know any jokes, so we're probably not the best person to stall.
If you guys
Do we have any comedians, stand-up comedians out there? Oh, Becca, yeah.
Already get one of these? Did y'all get one of these? It's just a suggested reading. Go ahead. You just go ahead and pass that around. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get going here. My name is Jeff Malcolmson. I'm the Photo Archives Manager here at the Montana Historical Society. And I'm going to introduce what it is that we're doing here, as well as introduce Ken Egan. This all has to do, I suppose, with this book. And that Ken wrote, maybe 2 years ago? Or about that. And pretty much this idea, I think, came from Barbara Pepper-Rottness here, who's also on the staff here at MHS, and she has her social media setup going here on the table, and she had the idea that this book kind of is set up nicely, is organized nicely for a period of time in Montana to go back in time to 1889 and work through. Over the course of a year, different aspects of Montana history in a very kind of an eclectic way, but in a way that allows us to go off on rabbit trails and explore things and discuss Montana history. So that was her idea, and we kind of have been developing this idea for the last, 4 months, 5 months maybe, with Ken Egan's help. So this is kind of the kickoff. We're going to spend a year talking about Montana 1889, revisiting that year, which was significant for Montana statehood, for achieving statehood. It's also kind of a bookend with Ken's first book, which was 1864, which was the beginning of Montana Territory. So going to the end of this, it's kind of a bookend of Montana's early years. So our idea is to start with this introductory presentation to just inform you of the book and the themes of the book and kind of what our plan is. We have a Facebook group for discussion, for also letting you know when events are happening, and for also watching the videos. I mean, these videos will be available on both YouTube and on the Facebook group page. So if you haven't become a member of that Facebook group, that's something I would suggest you do if you're interested in following along. We're going to be doing this for a year, so it's kind of a long haul. You don't have to stay with us the whole time, but we hope you can as much as possible. You could check back in 6 months, see what's been going on, and see what's coming up. We're planning 4 different, essentially quarterly get-togethers that will probably happen in this room. We're going to cover 4 sections of the book at a time, so like three months of the book. The book is broken down into months, and I don't want to just do Ken's presentation for him, but we're going to cover 3 months at a time in each of those quarterly meetings of the book group. So, a book group traditionally is people that get together locally and talk about books, read books together, and share what they're, what's going on and the issues and themes brought up by them. We're going to try to do this on Facebook and in person sometimes throughout the year. So I hope you are willing to come along, or at least you're interested enough to be here. And for anybody who's watching out in social media, I hope you're able to follow along as well. I wanted to start off just by kind of touching on the idea of going back to 1889. We're in 2019, and what is it? I don't know, 130 years. Wow. So it's pretty far back, isn't it? And most of us are not, 130 years old. We're not going to know. We don't know what it was like back then, do we? I mean, it's another place. It's another time. It's the idea of the past as a foreign country. We don't know how to speak that language of Montana 1889. We don't know exactly what those people were feeling. There's a variety of people that experienced it that are brought out really nicely in Ken's book. So we need to kind of think of where we are, and we're going to be time traveling. So I thought that it'd be neat to get a couple quotes to start us off, to think about time travel, and see if there we go. First one, I'm a baseball fan, so I thought this was great. Time travel is possible. We'll explain later. Jose Canseco, the sage of my childhood, maybe. So it is. Time travel is possible for us. Thanks to this book and other history books, we can go back and try to see what it was like back then. But we also want to think about our own times and how different it was and what it means to us that Montana started out a particular way. This one is more for me. I'm a photo archivist. I love historical photographs, but photography is a form of time travel, and it very much is. And I think you'll see in some of the photographs that are in the book and things that will illustrate Ken's talk, I think photography really helps us to see, at least a snapshot in time of what it was like back in 1889, perhaps. That's one way we can get back in time. This one's more for Ken, literature, great American writer John Steinbeck. We're going on a journey. A journey is like a marriage. A certain way to be wrong is to think you control it. And, we are experimenting here. This is an experiment in using social media over a long period of time and over the great geographical distances of Montana to try to bring people together and discuss one book and a bit of Montana history. So we don't control this whole thing, this whole process. We are kind of making it up as we go along. We have some practice. We have some experience with some of the tools we're using, but we've never done this kind of thing before. So it's going to be exciting and interesting. And, I think Ken will probably talk about this more too. It has some promise. It has some interesting, they're interesting tools to use to bridge divides that we have and difficulties that we have. Maybe even bring some others up, but it's going to be a fun journey. So I hope you can go on it with us. Last one, James Owen is a fantasy author. That's the thing about time travel. You're always moving forward even when you go back. So think about that. We are stuck in our own time, but when we do go back and look at the past, we're doing it for a purpose. We're trying to learn something about ourselves. We're trying to learn something about who we are as Montanans. What problems did we have 130 years ago? What things were going well? What's good about Montana? Why was it good that we formed a state in 1889? And to take that with us forward in our own lives. So make history relevant for today. And with that, I'm going to introduce Ken and also try to switch PowerPoints at the same time, which I can't do probably.
I think you did it. I think we're there.
Oh, this isn't yours, is it? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
There you are. For a moment. Okay, well, I'll introduce Ken and we'll see if it pops up on the screen. So Ken Egan is the Executive Director of Humanities Montana. He has served in that capacity since 2009. He was born in Montana, born in Polson. Graduated from high school in Great Falls and received his BA in English from University of Montana. So go Grizz, I guess. He has deep roots in the Treasure State. After completing his PhD in American Lit at University of Wisconsin-Madison, Ken taught college literature and writing at Middlebury College, Rocky Mountain College in Billings, and Drury University. He also received Fulbright grants to teach American literature in Greece and Slovakia. Sounds very interesting. He served on the board of then Montana Committee for the Humanities from 1989, not 1889, through 1992. He currently serves on the board of the Federation of State Humanities Councils. He and his wife Terry have 2 sons, Devin and Brian. They're living in Las Vegas and Berlin, respectively. Interesting to visit them, I would think.
It's a lot of fun.
Both of them. His books include Montana 1889, Montana 1864, Hope and Dread in Montana Literature, and Riders Under the Rims, a Yellowstone County anthology. So without further ado, here's Ken Egan.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
I'll have it.
Do we got it going? So welcome to the experiment, and I want to flag the folks who are online here. This truly is a multimedia event, and so we have a live audience. Thank you for being here on a cold day. And we have folks on YouTube. We have folks on Facebook. And so we're all together now. This is wonderful. And I want to especially shout out to a colleague of mine, Dr. Tim Lehman, who is leading a conversation at this House of Books in Billings. So he's actually there. So, hey, Tim, hope it's going well, buddy. Hope you're staying warm, and it's good to have you here. So this is an experiment. I'm very excited about it. I will tell you that I owe these 2 individuals, very good, I owe these 2 individuals, Barbara and Jeff, all the credit in the world. They're the ones who really put this together. Barb, I think, is really the dynamo, the engine behind it. And she approached me probably early summer and said, wouldn't it be fascinating to try to bring Montanans together on multiple platforms, particularly through a Facebook group, and talk about what happened here in this state when it was created as a state in 1889. And I say, absolutely wonderful idea. So we're going to have a grand experiment together. I have our contact information up there. I realize that the blueprint is probably a little hard to read, but basically feel free to email any of us, that is Jeff, Barb, or myself, if you have questions. And particularly, I'm happy to send this PowerPoint if it would be of help to you. The PowerPoint doubles as an introduction to my book, but more importantly, it's an introduction to the book group and how it's going to work. And I hope all of us will partake, will join in. So who am I and what is this book group all about? So as Jeff mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Humanities Montana, and we invite all Montanans to join a movement of ideas to strengthen our communities. I want to say that again. Humanities Montana invites all Montanans to join a movement of ideas to strengthen our communities. We particularly do this, that is, get people involved in ideas through books, through reading and discussion groups such as this, through Speakers Bureau presentations, etc. We also provide grants. We serve the entire state. We are particularly keen on serving folks outside the larger cities. So I hope you know Humanities Montana. Happy to visit with you about it afterwards. As Jeff mentioned, I taught college-level literature and humanities for 17 years at Rocky. Those were great years, still fond memories. Big believer in liberal arts education, in case you couldn't tell, and particularly love the idea of getting folks to talk across barriers, across demographic groups, across space and time, if you will. So this is doubly exciting for me. I wrote the book that we're going to be talking about, Montana 1889. I wrote it as a companion to my first history book, 1864. And a brief confession, I am a historian by avocation rather than vocation, meaning my deepest training is in literature and what's called cultural studies. But I minored in history at Wisconsin and at Montana, and writing these books has been pure joy for me. Because I'm a Montana kid, I faced this very simple question: what the heck happened here before I arrived, right? What was happening here before I got here? It's the classic question I think we all ask. So these two books have given me an opportunity to at least explore in depth 2 of those years that predated me. There's a joke out there that I'm going to write a book for every year of Montana statehood. That is not true. That is not happening. If you're curious, I can talk about my next book project, but it is not Montana 1890, just to be clear. And I am really honored to partner with the Montana Historical Society, which truly is an incredible gem for our state. I think this organization is so profoundly important in so many ways to us. And we're here in the physical presence of Montana history, but as you know, they do extraordinary outreach program. They are a leader for the museums around the state. They have extraordinary archives. I have benefited mightily, and I can't stress that enough. My books would not have been possible without the archives here at the Montana Historical Society. And part of what Barbara and Jeff said to me is they want to experiment with asking Montanans to come together across space and time to talk about what's happened here over the past 130 years. Let's go back to the moment of creation, the origin point in 1889, follow the year of 1889, see what was going on then, and then fast forward to our own time and place and ask, what's changed? Were the dreams of the founders realized? If not, what's happened instead, right? Also, you're going to meet an awful lot of, I think, highly fascinating characters who are going to trigger your own questions about what the heck was going on. So we're going to have a lot of fun. And I just want to emphasize that this has got to be fun for all of us. So how will the book group work? And Jeff did touch on this briefly, but I'm just going to kind of go through this in a step-by-step fashion so that you're very comfortable with how it's going to work. First of all, it is critical that you join our Facebook page. And again, I do apologize. I realize that light blue print's probably a little tricky to read, but again, I'm happy to send you the PowerPoint with the hyperlink. I can send that directly to you if you request it at my email address. So you join the group, very easy, right? You get a copy of the book, and of course, I would be very happy if you got a copy of the book. I love our libraries, so if you get a library copy, that works as well. Or if you want to pick up a copy, I do have some available here today, as Jeff explained. You can get one here at the Historical Society bookstore. You can get one at your local bookstore. In any way you can, do get your hands on a copy of 1889. Then what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and post questions about each month, and I'll explain the layout of the book briefly in a moment. I realize this might seem a little like, what's he mean each month? So each month I'll be posting questions for you to consider. And Jeff said this well. This is an experiment. We are not exactly sure how this is going to unfold. So I'm going to post 3 or 4 questions at the start of the month. And who knows which questions you all will be responding to, you'll be fired up by. You will probably want to pose your own questions. And let me emphasize that. I am not the center of authority here. I am one guy participating. I really, really mean this. One of my favorite words, it's kind of a big word, but I think it's an appropriate word. History is contingent or provisional, meaning it's always in flux, always being reconsidered, always being rewritten. And I have given one account of Montana 1889. Believe me, there are plenty of gaps in my coverage. Plus, you may disagree with some of the directions I go. Please jump in. Let's have some good arguments. I strongly believe history is about argument. It should be. That's what makes it healthy and important to all of us. So I'll post questions to our Facebook page by the 5th day of each month. and then go ahead and start posting your responses. I'll be checking virtually daily to see how folks are posting in response to those questions. I can't emphasize enough, though, that Barb and Jeff are Montana historians as well, and they are going to be participating and jumping in and helping with this process. We are going to be recommending a lot of additional reading. I can't stress this enough as well. Truly, my book is built on the basis, the foundation of a lot of fantastic history. And I'm going to call out my good friend Tim in Billings. Remember, he's the one at this House of Books leading a conversation based on this presentation. Tim has an incredible new book out about cattle drives out of Texas after the Civil War. The book's called Up the Trail, and I just finished reading it. It's incredibly readable. Scholars like Tim are critical to the work that I'm doing, that we're all doing. We owe those scholars such a deep debt. And so it's very, very important to me and to Jeff and to Barb that we introduce you to diverse reading, primary and secondary. As you know, primary would be text written at the time, in the moment. Secondary are commentaries on those texts. That's history books largely. So we're going to be recommending that, and today you'll see I'm going to be sharing some recommended reading later. Please, please, please enjoy the experiment. Have fun with it. And by all means, let's be playful. If I post a question and you think, well, that's not even a clear question, tell me, Just say, Egan, I don't think you really phrased that very clearly. Or, I think you missed the point of your own chapter. I think you kind of went off the beam there, Egan, because I sometimes do. Let's be honest, I'm a human being. So I'm very serious. And so you might want to pull us all back and say, the January chapter is really not about that. This is what it's about. Let's focus there instead. So again, please join the Facebook group. Get a copy of my book in whatever manner is most convenient for you, and then let's jump in and have some fun with it. So why join the group? Well, those who are here and those online, I maybe don't have to make the case, but I do want to make the case because I love Montana history, and I assume many of you, all of you do as well. But why should we do this? Why should we even engage in historical discussion, historical analysis, particularly going back 130 years? I think Jeff gave us some very good reasons, actually. We're on a journey together. We're time traveling. And I love that metaphor, by the way. I truly think of history as time travel. And you'll see there are a number of techniques I attempt in order to try to help us time travel, to jump back to 1889. But why should you join the group? History's fun. History informs our lives. It really does. And I'm going to try to show you that a little bit today. History surprises us constantly. Constantly. History makes us think. Of course it does. That is, we're going to encounter moments, individuals, actions, choices, and we're going to ask ourselves, why the heck did they make that choice? Would I make the same choice? What were the consequences or implications of that choice? So constantly thinking. And then we learn more together. And this is the brilliance of this whole setup that Barb and Jeff have invented. We're going to work together again. I am not the authority here. I am not certainly the sole authority here. You all know a lot. And so we're going to bring our minds together and we're going to teach each other and create this kind of learning environment. I had to include the asterisk because I truly believe this. I don't know if you agree with me, actually, you might respond. I say all these statements are doubly true for history from our home place. I don't know if you agree with that, but I just find that there's a kind of almost a necessity, a kind of bond, a kind of attraction to local, regional, state history that I don't always get with other kinds of history. So, all right, so now I have to demonstrate my claim, right? I'm saying that, history is fun, but what do I mean by that? Are you familiar with this photograph by any chance? Anybody familiar with this photograph? Okay. So this is from the Montana Historical Society archives. This is the family of Teddy Blue and Mary Abbott, an extraordinary couple. And this is a couple you're going to meet in the October chapter in Montana, 1889. Teddy Blue is one of the original cowboys. And again, just to return briefly to Tim Lehman's book, Up the Trail, Teddy Blue is a key informant when we think about the whole era of the cattle drives, right? So Teddy Blue is one of those wide open range cowboys. He comes up that trail. His parents were actually British. It's kind of interesting. And he rebelled against everything his father in particular, his very refined British father, represented. Comes up the trail, spends a lot of time in, you guessed it, Miles City, Montana in the 1870s. And speaking of history is fun, here's how Teddy got his name, Teddy Blue. He is following a potential paramour, just following her, I won't explain why, behind the stage at a Miles City theater. And what happens? He panics. He thinks, maybe she's luring me back here to steal my money. And he panics. And what happens? He turns suddenly. My spur catched on the carpet, and I fell through a thin partition onto the stage. Well, I thought, if you're before an audience, you've got to do something. So I grabbed a chair from one of the musicians and straddled it and bucked it all around the stage, yelling, "Whoa, blue," which is a cowpuncher expression at the time. And when I went out of that theater that night, I was blue, and Teddy Blue I have been for 55 years. Great story. By the way, this comes out of his incredible autobiography. We pointed him north. It's an incredible, for me, still the most powerful of the open range cattle drive memoirs. Who is Mary then? Mary is actually the daughter of Mr. Montana, Granville Stewart, and Aubani, his Shoshone spouse. And Teddy Blue ends up working at Granville Stewart's ranch in the Judith Basin, the DHS. It's fascinating reading about the Granville Stewart family through Teddy's eyes. Teddy was actually kind of intimidated by them. He's found them a very refined, a very literary, a very sophisticated family. And in a way, they represented everything Teddy wanted. He was tired of being an open-range cowboy. So he and Mary started courting. But it turns out that Aubani, the Shoshone mother, is very shrewd and very powerful, and she puts up a roadblock. She thinks Teddy's not good enough for her daughter. And so sadly, it takes the passing of Aubani in 1888 to finally make it possible for them to get married. There's another complication for them, though, when they get married in October of 1889. They have also fallen out with Granville Stewart. Granville, following Aubani's death, ends up developing a relationship with a much younger woman, a school teacher. And so they have very mixed feelings about Granville. Despite all that, they do get married in October of 1889, and here's how Teddy describes it. They wanted us to get married at the DHS, but at the last minute, she got an independent streak, Mary did, and so we drove over to the town of Alpine with the Anderson girls and a neighbor, and we were married by a justice of the peace, and that, in a way, writes the end of the story of my life on the open range. But I want to stress, for Teddy, this was a transformative moment and one that he was forever grateful for. So when you read about his life with Mary and their many children, it's an extraordinary, in many ways, a loving story. So history is fun. History also informs our lives. One of the most important tribal nations in our region is called the Little Shell Tribe, or the Little Shell Nation. Have you all heard of the Little Shells? Yes. You probably know that they are recognized by the state of Montana, but not by the federal government. And one of the questions I'm often asked is, who are the Little Shell? Where did they come from? What is their root? What are their origins? Where are they from? Well, a key to that is a man who actually had a very profound role in Montana history, and his name is Louie Riel. Louie was Métis, mixed, right? The Métis people truly were born of the intermarriage of French trappers and Indian women, particularly Chippewa and Cree. And so they formed this extraordinary nation in the heart of our continent. And again, I have to mention the great scholars who have gone before me, particularly Joseph Kinsey Howard, and he's written a great book about Louie Riel called Strange Empire. Strongly recommend it. Well, how did the Métis play into 1889? Well, fascinatingly, Louie Riel was actually put to death by the Canadian government in 1885 up in Saskatchewan. And you're thinking, what's this got to do with 1889? Well, the Congress in 1889 raises the question, hold it, was Louie Riel actually an American citizen, a Montana citizen, and so put to death unjustly? If so, what should we do as a nation in opposition to that? So, first of all, I have this opportunity then. We have an opportunity to read about Louie Riel, his extraordinary story of first helping with the founding of Manitoba in 1870, then being forced into exile. He moves to Montana in 1879. He does become an American citizen, as best we can tell. He has a very interesting career here. He actually tries to form a kind of, you might call it a pan-tribal nation here in Montana, particularly in the Milk River country up in northern Montana. That is foiled. He goes on to teach at St. Peter's Mission, and then in 1884, he's called to go back to Canada, in this case Saskatchewan, in order to lead another resistance movement, and he's put to death. What happens after he's put to death is many of his allies, the Chippewa, the Cree, the Métis, they flow back across the border. So they are now living in Montana in 1889, and many Montana newspapers are writing about these people. Again, these are the ancestors of the Little Shell people, right? And so this is just a brief excerpt of what newspapers were writing about the Métis in 1889. We have in northern and western Montana a nomadic people who recognize no government as theirs. Now understand, this is written from a particular perspective. History is going to make us think. So we have to read through this article and critique it, if you will. And they acknowledge no tribal relations. They know no home save the wide rolling prairie, and it matters little to them, apparently, so they have a little to eat and much to drink. Again, consider the source. We refer to the roaming half-breeds. So the Métis were referred to as the breeds at this time, wherever they hail from, whether from the British or the American side of the line. Let it be remembered that we are speaking of the roving half-breeds, those in whom the Indian nature seems to predominate. So what I'm suggesting is that in 1889, the Métis, the ancestors to the Little Shell, are very much on Montanans' mind as they form their state, and they think of them as a problem. And again, folks, we got to think of counterpoints in history, countering points of view, and of course, the Métis have an alternative view of what happened. History surprises us. How many of you know Evelyn Cameron? Who's Evelyn Cameron? Tell me who she is. How do you? Photographer. From where? Which part of Montana? Do you remember? Right. So Evelyn is associated with the Terry Badlands. And in fact, if you go to Terry, they still have an extraordinary museum there, right, with a lot of her photographs. So she's an extraordinary Montana original. So one of the joys for me as I was researching 1889 is you're always looking for those quirky, idiosyncratic, unexpected stories. Boom. Turns out Evelyn honeymooned in Montana in the fall of 1889. What do you think of this photograph? How do you react to this photograph? What do you see there? What's that? Yeah, it's a bear. She's holding a bear cub. So she is on a hunting trip with her, we think, husband, Ewan. We think husband. We'll get back to that. And it's like she's holding up this bear cub and saying, I'm just as wild as this bear cub, right? She's got this wonderful attitude. This is the daughter of an extremely wealthy British family, right? And she's in the outback of Montana in the fall of 1889. I said, we think she's married to Ewan. It turns out recent historians have uncovered evidence that he may not have been officially divorced yet from his opera singer wife. So that adds a little piquancy, a little interest to this story. Nonetheless, it tells you so much about Evelyn that she would choose to honeymoon in this place. And believe me, when you read the roster of animals they killed, they were serious hunters. By the way, they were accompanied by one of the scouts for Custer. They also had their own chef. They maybe weren't roughing it as much as we might assume here. But anyway, there it is. As you know, they go on to live then in the Terry area. They create 3 Eve ranches. Turns out Evelyn is the real sticker. She's the tough one. Ewan, frankly, kind of collapses over the course of time. But one of the ways that she is a sticker, that she can find income, right, is to take those extraordinary photographs. If you don't know her photographs, please go right now, start looking at them. They're extraordinary. And of course, here at the Montana Historical Society, we have many of them available. In fact, this one is from the Montana Historical Society. History makes us think. History challenges us. I live in Missoula, and the name itself, Missoula, is a Salish word, and actually abbreviated version of a Salish word, which means, we think, place of chilly waters. There are alternative translations. I'm on Salish land, and so I comfortably live there, etc. And then every once in a while, it hits you. This truly is Salish land. There is deep history here. Who are the Salish? What was their experience like? Well, as it happens, 1889 was a dire year for the Salish people of the Bitterroot Valley. This is Chief Charlo. His father, Victor, had negotiated very effectively with the U.S. government in 1855. So we're jumping back from 89 to 55. And at the Council Groves Treaty, Victor was able to hold on to the Bitterroot Valley. He used a kind of ploy, I think it was just a brilliant stratagem, where he said, basically, we the Salish people are not leaving the Bitterroot, which as you know is south of Missoula. We're not leaving the Bitterroot until you do a proper survey and you compel us to leave. So that gesture, in effect, buys almost, 30 years for the Salish people in the Bitterroot Valley. Sadly, in November of 1889, Charlo can no longer hold out, and so he will write to Peter Ronan, the Indian agent, in November of 89, I will go, that is, I will leave the Bitterroot Valley. I and my children, my young men are becoming bad. They have no place to hunt. My women are hungry. For their sake I will go. I do not want the land you promise. I do not believe in your promises. All I want is enough ground for my grave. We will go over there. Meaning they're going to move north of Missoula into the Flathead country, right? The Jocko Valley. It's a devastating moment, okay? And it's a moment that was photographed. We actually have striking, poignant, heartbreaking photographs of the day they move. And we have eyewitness accounts of what that journey was. And I call it here a Salish Trail of Tears, which of course is a reference to the Cherokee Trail of Tears from the 1830s. But here is one eyewitness account of what that was like that day. They moved from the Bitterroot to the Flathead country. A Salish woman, Marianne Coombs, who was a child, said, everyone was in tears, even the men, and the procession was similar to a funeral march. So that was 1889 too, and we have to think about that. Finally, we learn more together, right? I'm claiming that the history group we're forming is better if we all join in. This is Helen Clark. She is the daughter of Malcolm Clark, as well as Kokokna, who is her Blackfeet mother. And Helen was an extraordinary person. She was sent as a young woman to get an advanced, sophisticated training in the East, actually in St. Paul. She comes back and witnesses her own father's murder in 1869 at the hands of Owl Child, who's a relative. She then goes back east. She becomes a famous actress. Well, fast forward to 1889. We'll talk about her, write about her, think about her in December of this year because she chooses to leave Montana in 1889. And I really am looking forward to visiting with you all and all those who are live streaming, et cetera, available through multiple technologies. I want to visit about why that is. Why does Helen Clark choose to leave Montana? Is it her in-between status? And just to give you the flavor of that, we have a kind of famous passage where one parent writes about her. She was a school teacher in Helena for a while, and one parent says, I do not intend sending Grace and Robbie to school again this winter. I have long been dissatisfied with the school. Grace's teacher, Miss Clark, is a half-breed Indian, and the daughter of Malcolm Clark, who you perhaps remember was killed by the Indians nearly 11 years ago. Miss C was educated in a convent and is avowedly a Catholic, but she has no faith in God or man. So why does Helen Clark choose to leave? What do we think of her choices? When she leaves, she actually becomes an allotment agent. And I'm not going to go into allotment right now, but we'll talk about that when we get to Helen. She becomes an allotment agent, an extraordinary choice, ultimately comes back to Montana. Again, I'm going to learn from you. I would love to get more insight into her choices. By the way, this is one of her theater poses, right? This is when she was an actress. Okay, so those are some of the reasons, those are some of the stories we're going to engage together. Let me pause for a moment. Do you guys have any questions here live or any questions coming across Facebook? Just take a deep breath and give us a chance to just sort of, we're good? Yes?
This is a very fundamental question.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Facebook page name? Is it Discovering?
Revisiting Montana 1889, a book group.
Right, right,
That's the name. That's so we
Right.
want to get on. That's what we love.
right.
You go to the MHS Facebook page.
Oh, okay.
So this is what it is right here. This is actually the banner for it, so,
So you go to
Yeah.
Montana MHS Facebook page and then go to this.
And then you'll see a group link, groups, or there's also a join group. There's a big blue box right at the top, right under the photograph.
yeah. And we're really friendly. We let everybody join, so you won't have any trouble joining. Yes, another question.
So how do you plan to, monitor or curate the discussions? Because as we all know on Facebook, a thread can start going off in all kinds of directions.
Yes.
So how can you, that's where I sort of get frustrated. So how are you going to help us?
Yes. So the question is, how are we going to curate the Facebook page? Because as we know, comments on a Facebook page can go in many directions, right? And you might be trailing these different leads or following different paths, etc. And my honest answer is we're going to find out by doing it. And so I acknowledge that is a central challenge. And what I may attempt to do at some point is if I see a number of threads going, I may try to bring those threads together, weave them together, and say, okay, guys, I'm going to start a new discussion line here, a new thread, and just capture, here are the key comments I heard in the prior threads. Let's bring those together and let's see if we can pursue kind of a single path. But you're raising exactly the right question, but it's kind of fun too.
Are you going to bring your background as a teacher?
Yeah, yeah. Plus, I have my trusty sidekicks here, so I've got
That in a sense is, you seem to be opinionated as a species.
we are.
And
Yeah.
which is fine, and there's some very important, social issues that will come out of this, but that isn't necessarily education to just get into an argument.
Right.
You must have some experience in getting us past that.
Yes. Well, we're going to definitely work on that, and it's a very good point. So the point there is there's concern that we might end up in conversations that aren't as informative or as informed, perhaps, and so it'll be my task to pull us back toward what I would consider meaningful discussion and debate about the history. So thank you for that. That was an excellent observation. So, all right. So to warm us up, now you know why we're going to do this. So it's time to kind of get a little more familiarized with this book. This is a quirky book, if you haven't had a chance to look at it. 1889 is quirky. It's quirky by design. And I blame a whole bunch of friends who helped me write the first book, 1864, which became the pattern, the paradigm for 1889. If you open this book up, you discover, first of all, that it's organized by months, right? So as you open it, you'll see there's an introduction. I get to that in a moment, explain a little bit about my introduction. Then you'll hit a whole bunch of passages from 1889 that kind of, I hope, give you the flavor of what's happening in 1889. Then boom, you jump into the month of January, and you'll discover a series of 3 to 4 to 5 stories under each month. And I did that in part because I wanted to create what I think of as a kind of forward movement through the book where you read these vignettes, these relatively short episodic vignettes. You absorb those, you move on to the next month, and lo and behold, you may encounter one of the key characters in the previous month in the next month, and you start to weave, as it were, your own patterns, your own understanding of who these individuals are. So that's a big part of it. Also, frankly, I was very selective, and this is why I keep saying, you guys know a lot, and you'll find there are gaps in my coverage. I have been intentionally provocative at times. I've chosen the stories that call to me, or that I think maybe that's going to surprise us, or that's going to reveal something about Montana 1889 that I hadn't thought about. And in some ways, you might find that I kind of slide by some of the more traditional history. So we'll probably want to fill in, as it were, around my stories. I include a lot of what are called epigraphs, which are just quotations at the start of the book and at the start of each chapter. And I don't want to say why I did that. I want to get your reaction to that, whether it works or not. I will tell you that the epigraphs are primarily from newspapers. One of the extraordinary things about doing history right now is we have access to an extraordinary amount of digitized newspapers. You can go back to Butte in 1889, Helena 1889, Billings 1889, Red Lodge kind of in 1889, a lot of Miles City, all of that available through Chronicling America and through the Montana Historical Society website. And so I include a lot of epigraphs where when actually I don't want to say anything more about why, I'm curious whether you think that works or not. And then the photographs, Jeff made such a critical point. One of the great joys for me was coming to the Historical Society, going to other archives and finding photographs. You've seen an example. I have to admit, the Evelyn Cameron is one of my favorites, where you have young Evelyn Cameron in all of that sort of cockiness is all I can call it, sitting on that horse, holding that bear, and saying, I'm pretty darn cool here in 1889 in Montana. So the photographs. But, a couple of folks have noted to me they're not sure that my choices are the best choices for photographs. And I'm serious. That's worth talking about, arguing about when we get to those. And then do scan the reference list at the very end of the book. Again, my book is built on an incredible foundation of scholarship that just continues to come out. We are so lucky, and so much of this is available to us now digitally. I can't stress that enough. I'm particularly in awe of the primary documents like Indian agent reports from 1889. You can go, boom, right to those reports and read what Peter Ronan said about the Flathead Reservation, just to take an example. Extraordinary. Or there's a lot happening on the Crow Reservation in 1889. You can read the Indian agent's account of that. And then, of course, we try to flip that script and we try to enter into, as best we can, the perceptions, the insights, the knowledge, the understanding of indigenous peoples. And you'll notice that I try to quote them directly whenever possible. I want to quote their point of view, not my point of view. So anyway, scan that reference list at the end of the book, and I hope you become as addicted to Montana history as I am, and you'll find yourself checking it out. So I want to just lead. This is the first question that I'm going to post for you on our group Facebook page. This is the first question. The book begins, Montana 1889 begins. The American West was born on the plains of Montana in the 1880s. Do you agree with that claim? Now, I hope you find that provocative. I hope you find that provocative. I meant it to be provocative. And I'll go farther than that. This is one of the central themes in the book. So what I try to do is weave certain themes through the book. And you can tell me whether or not I did it successfully. But this is one of the key themes. What the heck am I talking about? The American West was born. What is Egan talking about? So I'm going to read you the first paragraph of the book. It's a short paragraph. If you'll listen, and if you'll be asking yourself, what might he mean by that? Could I possibly agree with that? Has he lost his mind? What is going on with Egan here? The American West was born on the plains of Montana in the 1880s. The West of cowboys and Indians, wide open vistas, freedom from routine and convention, horses sweeping across open plains, that dream vision, that myth, that faith made famous by movies, television, and books was created in large part in the territory that would soon become a state. I'm arguing right there that the myth of the West was largely created here in Montana in the 1880s. Now, my good historian friends, including Jeff, for example, might want to push back immediately and say, hold it. The myth of the West, that was around a long time. What do you mean it was born in the 1880s? That seems impossible. Oh, by the way, the whole cowboy business, really, that migrated up from Mexico, a lot of that. So didn't it start there in Mexico, in Texas? And you know, Teddy Blue, he's coming up here in the 1870s. What do you mean the 1880s? So I'm going to ask you to store this question, think about it, and argue with me. Let's have some fun with that. Do you agree with me? What I will say is that it's fair to acknowledge Montana undergoes profound changes in the 1880s. You know this, right? So railroads arrive in full force in the 1880s, right? The Northern Pacific and the Great Northern both arrive. Massive change for this state. We have the creation of major Indian reservations, particularly up on the High Line. You have the elimination of the bison. All of that is happening in the 1880s, culminating there. And so the myth of the West, if it's true that this myth was created, why was it created? I will tell you that there's some key figures in the book that I come back to as I kind of play this theme. One of them is Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt appears in the April chapter, for example. And so see what Theodore says about this. See what Charlie Russell says about it. Charlie turns 25 years old in March of 1889. What's Charlie up to? What's he thinking about? Calamity Jane makes a brief appearance. What is she up to? Nanny Alderson writes about cowboys. So, okay, enough said. I hope I've kind of stimulated a little thinking there, and we'll have some fun with that. But this will likely be a discussion throughout the year, and I'm perfectly happy to be convinced that, Ken, you really are wrong about that. But it's sure fun to argue about. So, yeah. Briefly, I'm just going to go very briefly because I know time is passing here. Some questions for January. In addition to that question I just posed, I'll pose 4 specific questions about January. The first is from the epigraph that leads the January chapter. You can read it for yourselves. With its mines of wealth, before which the fabled stores of Aladdin's cave sink into insignificance, and its thousands of yet undeveloped treasure stores, who can predict the glory of the future Montana, and who can define its possibilities? That's January of 1889. And by the way, I should have said this probably an hour ago. You do understand we became a state officially November 8th, 1889, just to state that. So this is presuming, looking ahead to statehood, right? And then we have this extraordinary moment. Why does young man afraid of his horses, a Lakota leader, want to visit the Crow Reservation in January of 1889? Do his reasons surprise you? So the first vignette in the book really is about young man afraid of his horses. This is fascinating. He writes a letter to General Crook saying, I really want to go visit my Crow relatives. Why is that interesting? This leader, this warrior, he was actually one of the primary antagonists toward the Crow much of the 1860s and 70s. And now suddenly he wants to visit with the Crow. What is happening there? Why is that happening? That's fascinating. By the way, isn't that an extraordinary photograph? Just extraordinary. And then y'all know who this is, right? This is Marcus Daly. By the way, thinking about photographs, I wanted to choose a photograph of Marcus that was not quite so what I would call grandfatherly or avuncular. Whenever you see Marcus Daly, it's kind of this soft focus, and he looks like the genial Irishman. I think there's a little more intensity here, a little more the Marcus Daly who was a major operator and a very cunning one too. And so that's why I chose that particular photograph from here at MHS. Anyway, what comes to mind when you think of Marcus Daly? And do his decisions, as told in this chapter, overturn or confirm your expectations of the man? We're going to lead that vignette with a very strong quote from Marcus Daly, a surprising quote to me. Then we're going to find out what motivated him to say that. And yes, it has everything to do with William Clark. So we're going to get the Clash of the Copper Kings right away in January. And then finally, the next to the last territorial governor is a very refined fellow named Governor Leslie, and he delivers a speech to the final Montana territorial legislature, and fascinating to read what he has to say. And I want you to think about why it took so long for Montana to become a state. Why did it take 25 years to go from territory to state? That's a long time. And I think this quote actually has some hints in it, right? You can kind of sense what's underneath there, what the subtext is, why it took so long for Montana to become a state. So you can read that and have some fun arguing about that as well. And I did promise suggestions for further reading. For those who are here, we have hard copies. So these are some of the key sources that I relied on as I was composing the January chapter. And I won't run through all of them other than to say a couple of these are, of course, legends, all right? I studied with K. Ross Toole. Actually, when I say that, what it means is that in 1978, I sat in an auditorium and listened to K. Ross Toole lecture. And if you ever had that pleasure, it was kind of like listening to the voice of God, honestly it was. And so anyway, I studied with him. I listened to his great lectures. You'll recognize, of course, Michael Malone, but Fred Hoxie's incredible book about the Crow people, the proceedings and debate of the Constitutional Convention. And by the way, thank you, Barbara. She brought some of those references. They're available if you want to glance at them over there. The proceedings are also available online. And I know on first blush, you might think, who wants to read the proceedings of a constitution? It's fascinating. And you'll discover as you read through my book, a lot of surprises occurred during that Constitutional Convention. And then extraordinary book about uniting the tribes, the rise and fall of the Pan-Indian community. Have to get in my photo credits, okay? Always acknowledge where you got your materials, where you got your sources, and again, Historical Society, thank you for being here. And then finally, and I'm going to leave this up because I want to give folks a chance to write this down if they need to. And let me reiterate, happy to send you the full PowerPoint. So please visit the Historical Society website. It is loaded and it's layered, okay? One thing I do have to emphasize is their search function is powerful, but I spent a lot of time just kind of navigating through the layers of the website. And you recover so much information. Also, I have to say, their staff is so responsive. And if you have a question, please fire off a question. I do have, a personal website, Montana1864.com. And that was created, obviously, when 1864 came out in 2014 for the sesquicentennial of the territory. And it has a lot of embedded links. If you want to just go ahead and check out some of those links and kind of jump. It really is time travel. You can jump suddenly into a first-person account of when the Stewart brothers went to the, what is now Hardin on the Bighorn River back in 1864. And then once again, our contact information, our full names and contact information, and we are going to be very responsive. If you email us, we want to answer your questions. We want to be able to keep you involved. So that is the talk, but I am happy to hang out and just answer questions. Or if you have any more questions, particularly about how the book group is going to work, please, let's get those out and we can kind of demystify the experience, as it were. So, yeah. Any questions coming in through the web there? No questions through the web. Okay. So, all right. Are you all ready to go forward? Yay! Thank you. You all ready? All ready to go forward and read and argue. And I am thinking already long and hard about how we're going to curate the Facebook page. It's a very good question. On the other hand, it might be wild and wonderful. Might be the Wild West. I don't know. It could turn out to be. So, great. Thank you all. So I'll hang out. If you want to buy copies of the book, great. If you just want to chat, happy to do that. And thank you to those who joined us online, too. It's great to see you. Tim, hope it was a good experience for you, buddy. So be well.